Ciao. Ehi. Sì. So this is Ciao Passi.
Welcome.
Ciao.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Welcome. Thank you for doing this. Looking forward.
Yes.
Yeah. Personal apologies because at some point I have to make out 2 weeks. Yeah, so I have to, keep part of the talk. Looking forward also to hanging out, maybe even some other time. Anyway, thank you and. So what is
I don't know. Che notizie ci sono? I don't know if I hope he is there. Siamo collegati? Daniel c'è? Ok, perfect. From yes, it's there because he's not the only one. Proviamo da qua, no? Questo è già attaccato. Sì. Aspetta. Daniel, are you there? Can you hear us? Can you turn your camera on?
It's turned on.
Proviamo da qua, no? Questo è già attaccato. Sorry, some technical issues before starting. I know that everybody is already connected, so also via Zoom and streaming. So no, okay. So let me start then. So it's nice to see you again. Hello, everyone. I'm introducing myself because we have also an audience that is following us from online. So I'm Cristina Baldacci from Ca' Foscari University, Venice. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all again, those who are attending in presence at the Auditorium Santa Margherita in Venice, and those who are following us online, both on Zoom and in streaming. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's talk between our guest speakers. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all again, those who are attending in presence at the Auditorium Santa Margherita in Venice, and those who are following us online, both on Zoom and in streaming. I hope it won't go on like this. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all to today's talk between our guest speakers. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all again, those who are attending in presence at the Auditorium Santa Margherita in Venice, and those who are following us online, both on Zoom and in streaming. I hope it won't go on like this. Today's talk between our guest speakers. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all again, those who are attending in presence at the Auditorium Santa Margherita. What? It's an installation, a performance, let's say. Yeah, what we understood is A great pleasure. Okay. And to welcome you. So to today's talk between artist Jakob Kudstensen and art curator Daniel Birnbaum, who is also the director of Acute Art in London and also formerly director of the Venice Biennale in 2009. Daniel, I hope you are there. We can see you right now, but in a few minutes. As many of you already know, today's talk is part of the Anthropocene Campus Venice, a one-week educational event lasting until Sunday 16 around the theme of water politics in the age of the Anthropocene. To find out more about the campus program and about the public events that you can watch on live stream, please check our webpage at www.acv2021.org. I'm thrilled about today's talk, as it is also the opening event of the special project Aquaphobia, Fear of Water. Valeria Fakin and I have been working at the project in the last 2 years in collaboration with Jakob and the London-based collective Black Shack. When we first conceived the project, which includes the online exhibition and platform aquaphobia.world and 2 meetings, so today's talk and tomorrow morning workshop with guest speakers Monica Bello, Joe Bowlby, and Libby Haney. These 2 meetings will aim at discussing in depth Jacob's work in relation to the Anthropocene Campus Venice core themes. So when we first planned Aquaphobia, Fear of Water, Valeria and I were thinking of an exhibition to take place at Ca' Foscari's main building on the Grand Canal. The idea was to present an installation of Aquaphobia, Jakob's 2017 VR work, which is at the core of the project. So Aquaphobia is in direct relation to the Venice, so an Aquaphobia and project meant to be in direct relation to the Venice water system and lagoon. The pandemic prevented us from doing so. You can imagine that with the hygiene procedures that we still have to follow, it would have been very difficult for the exhibition visitors to wear VR headsets in total safety. But every cloud has a silver lining. And having moved the project entirely online has given us the possibility not only to make it available to a larger audience for a longer time, aquaphobia.world will remain online for at least 6 months. We are very thankful for Jakob for permitting us to do that. It also gave us the possibility to reflect on how to present a VR work and therefore an immersive experience on a laptop or smartphone screen. And this is something on which Jakob is working a lot presently. And also to think whether it is still appropriate to speak of an exhibition for this specific presentation format. As I was mentioning yesterday morning in my welcome speech, Aquaphobia is the first work in which Jakob virtually recreated an endangered ecosystem by choosing wetlands as a key theme and the fear of water as a starting point to investigate the role of human empathy in tackling urgent climate issues. More recently, he conceived liminal lands at Luna Foundation in Arles and Börl at Berghain in Berlin, which have also wetlands at the core. The connection with Venice and with the lagoon is therefore tight. I will not go any farther on this because Jakob will discuss about both projects with Daniel shortly. To conclude my short presentation, let me warmly thank, together with Valeria, Jakob and Daniel again. Thank you so much. And Liz Kircher, also from Jakob Stensen Studio, for her friendly and professional help. Hi, Liz. Liz is there too. Black Shack, in the person of James Frefford, for the great job he did in designing aquaphobia.world. Anna Zemella for her beautiful photograph of the Venice Lagoon, which we used also for aquaphobia.world. And then the Danish Arts Foundation as a main sponsor. And last but not least, my wonderful co-curator, Valeria, who is also a friend and who is also a Ca' Foscari University alumna. To whom I give now the floor to briefly present you the Aquaphobia.world exhibition and platform. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks to Christina for being such a wonderful and amazing partner in this journey and for the realization of the project Aquaphobia, Fear of Water, and as well, to Jacob. Thanks also to Pierpaolo Modeo, Shaul Bassi, and Barbara Dal Mercato for believing and supporting the project from day one as part of the Anthropocene Campus Venice and all the institutional partners involved in the process. I will now guide you through the online exhibition and experience, which is accessible now at aquaphobia.world. You will land on an informational page with a calendar of the events centered around aquaphobia, fear of water, together with a text to contextualize why specifically we choose aquaphobia. Once we decided to realize an online experience, it was very important to us to support and to provide a fully explanatory framework in order to access the experience fully prepared. While echoing Luz, Valentino, Pierre, and Brooklyn, the work resonated with us for the focus it addressed on climate change from a psychological and empathical perspective, and for its urgency in addressing the project driving questions. How could the experience of becoming one with water help humans embrace a more resilient system of living? By clicking on the Anthropocene Campus Venice, you will be redirected to the program public event. While clicking on the info sign, you will find more content such as Aquaphobia narration, which was written by Jacob and performed by artist Rendon Johnson. And this page will be implemented through time, becoming a living and transmedia archive. Then by scrolling up and clicking on click to experience, you will then enter the experience itself. At the end of it, you will be able to choose between a 360 degrees video, which will allow you to move your screen and follow the scene from multiple perspectives, as if the screen is an extension of your own eyes and limbs. For those of you whose mobile doesn't support it, you can still experience a 2D video, as we will do soon together. I will now ask you all to relax and follow my voice while I guide you through a 5-step meditation number that mimics the medical stages for the treatment of a fear of water. Take a sip of water. Think of it entering your body as a microbe. Visualize it as a dense mass that is growing inside and outside of you. Accept the water presence around you. Allow your mind and body to fully connect with it. Slowly, imagine dipping your toes into it. Imagine entering the water with your limbs, feeling the cold fluid touching your skin. Take a big breath and expand your ribs. Feel the water beneath, around you, as part of you. Suspend the breath and exhale long and deep. Then dip under the water. The microbe is now enormous and independent of you. You now accept and embrace each other. You have become one.
After the breakup, you compartmentalized our relationship beyond exhibitionist plastic glass. You stored images of us on a remote subterranean server, but I broke free. My microscopic, wet materials spread like a virus, infiltrating the digital storage units you used to access us from. Wires are warm with me. We reset the power structure of our relationship. In control. Direct your eyes downwards, further towards your feet. You've sunken about an inch into the mud. Wiggle your toes. Most of you is water. The water and the mud, leaching through the permeable barrier of your shoes towards your thin, porous skin. Sink further. My liquid enters the inner workings of your body system. I don't understand why you insist on digging in our mutual past. We were many things, but we are never mutually exclusive. The items you threw out the window in anger at my promiscuous practices will continue to descend slowly into my red clay mud. You think you are not of me, but you are of me. On this peninsula, always present beneath the concrete you paved. You were never in charge. The reality of my physical past looks and configuration were always present, even though you attempted to hide them through what you call a cultivation process. My cattails, red clay, steam, and human were always looming beneath your nose when we coexisted. But submitting to you was only an imagination, a virtual reality of fantasy of yours. You are not equal. Learning the math behind my rhythmic behavior makes you dance in excitement. Hop in, head first. Learn the cadence of my movements, animate them, score them. Through the rhythm of my waves, we can learn to move in tandem. Close your eyes and feel the mass of my droplets slide across body hair, over eyelids, learn to swim.
I will now pass the stage virtually and in presence to Daniel and Jakob. By the end of their Q&A, I would like to invite you all to engage in the conversation by raising your hands for the open question session. And thank you very much. Jakob and Daniel, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Great to see this beautiful piece again.
Thank you.
Can you hear
It's
me?
nice to be here. Is Daniel here?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Hi, Jacob. So good to see you. And wonderful to see the art piece again.
It's good to see you as well.
Maybe a few words about this event. I'm very happy to be in Venice, although I'm actually in my apartment in London. It's a kind of symbolic place to start, maybe. You know, Venice with its water and its water issues, and the place where the most important art show in the world, I think, is staged every second year, the Venice Biennale. I'm in London. Tomorrow there's a big art fair opening here, and a few weeks ago I was actually in Switzerland where they do another big art fair, and it's interesting that we have this event here with a virtual reality piece and a conversation that takes place in front of a live audience in Venice, but with one participant, me, in another country. This was possible a few years ago, but it wouldn't have happened. It's actually become, you know, the new normal, it seems. Just a few weeks ago, I was in a similar situation, although it was actually a pod. It was just an audio event with the director of the Basel Art Fair, Mark Spiegler. And, you know, he talked a little bit about the future of art and the art institution. And he said, I don't think it's going to be digital. And then he added, I don't think it's going to go back to normal again, being only physical. In the future, it will be hybrid, a word that, you know, can mean many different things. But I guess this event here and Jacob's piece, the way it now reaches people, is very much an example of a hybrid artwork, artwork and art world. And Jacob, I thought we would start a little bit with asking you about this piece, of course. The first piece I saw many years ago, lovely, very interesting, rich piece. But you have a very special set of skills, I think, in this future art world that we don't know how to navigate yet. I think Jacob really has been and is an inspiring figure. And for me, he's been important because I've seen these works, not all of them, but recently a beautiful piece in Arles that I'm sure we will talk about also. And many years ago, already, this piece that you're showing in Venice, which was, as I said, the first major VR piece by Jacob I saw. But Jacob, what do you think? This is a world that you are navigating more with greater skill than most. The future of the art world, will it be events like this?
I think yes and no. In one way, yes, I think this hybrid format is very interesting to me because I went into the art world also coming from more of video game industry and making kind of psychological virtual environments. But in that field, you have a lot of limitation. So the art world became a space of possibility to me. It enabled like making a work like Aquaphobia, where I write a poem, I go to a landscape, and I interviewed people about their imaginations of the future landscape at what's called Luis Valentino Park and Pier in Brooklyn. It's a wetland. And then I, make an artwork from that. And that was not possible for me in more like a video game industry. But in museums, it was possible. So in that way, it enabled another form of creation. But on the other hand, the art world, when I started showing Aquaphobia, had a limitation to the extent to which they were able to introduce these new immersive formats to a wider audience. And there was not really any form of online virtual engagement right when I made it. Of course, then Acute Art happened, and I work with Acute Art also on Aquaphobia, on distributing it, on sharing it with people. And that enabled like a new format. But I think it's only within the past maybe 2 years that this, because of COVID, this hybrid format has come along. And for me, it fits very well the way that I work with this across different fields, from like art, video games, poetry, working with field biologists. And the way I look at it is sort of, that's just a contemporary landscape. So that's being changed by the climate. And that's kind of contemporary culture. And we have different spaces, each with different histories and traditions. And right now there's a lot of merger between their borders. So sort of like a cell with like a membrane where you can go back and forth. The way I think about, making art is something that can exist in multiple formats. So it's not just a future artwork, it's like more a future of, cultural creation in general. So it's also the future of, making conferences that are physical and virtual. It's the future of museums that are also online, but it's also the future of video games. It's the future of kind of immersive psychology in a way. So I just see everything is like moving and changing. And I never know what the final artwork or project is when I begin. It's like, it's being created through process. Yeah.
And it's interesting that that we talk about, well, in a way, two issues that are somehow strangely intertwined. One is the pandemic and what it led to, that here we are, we can't really travel. The other theme is much, much bigger, having to do with the ecology. And we all know that, the world will change and our way of inhabiting the planet will have to change. And it's interesting how, the immediate reactions to the pandemic from the world of intellectuals, how many people immediately phrased the pandemic and the lockdown as a kind of dress rehearsal, as a test balloon, basically, for a bigger challenge. I remember Noam Chomsky, the American intellectual, immediately said that this is a dress rehearsal. And then came Bruno Latour, important person in the ecological discourse, who said the same. And it actually spread also to major politicians. I think both Macron and Merkel have talked about this as a kind of, yes, a dress rehearsal. And it's interesting with you, Jacob, that you have, worked with technology, which of course is not an entirely innocent world. Everything based on the internet actually consumes energy and everything. But you have linked these new possibilities to the most urgent of issues having to do with ecological matters. And to prepare this talk, I didn't really know where to begin, but I read some of the interviews with you, and you often talk about a critique of an anthropocentric worldview, that it's interesting to kind of understand that there are other perceptual possibilities, other ways of seeing the world, other temporalities. And I guess you're not alone with this. I think Thomas Saraceno, or maybe Olafur Eliasson, or yesterday Annika Yi, great American artist, opened the Tate. It is a new discussion, but you have really been at the center of this for a few years now. I mean, how do you see the relationship between ecological challenges and new technologies? Is technology part of the solution, or is technology part of the problem?
Both. I think it depends a lot on how it's used. So speaking from the perspective of aquaphobia, for me, like, I never put technology at the forefront of my work. It's never the key narrative. So with aquaphobia, it's more like a psychology of overcoming fear of water. So the uniqueness here is that you can put on a headset and you start underground in the landscape, and you meet this water organism, and it starts kind of confronting you, and it starts really small in front of you. And then as you move through the landscape, it grows. And this microorganism, normally it's invisible to us, but suddenly it becomes like a mass entity that's moving through you, that's communicating with you. And as you move through this virtual landscape, the landscape kind of responds to you. So you start becoming a rhythm between your human body, between what you feel and the environment, and something talking to you within the environment. But in aquaphobia, the story is also that the water kind of breaks up with you. So there's like a love story with a microbe. And it tells kind of how you're breaking up. And in the end, you have to accept that you are two separate entities, yet connected. But you are, in a way, powerless to the power of the water. So it's like creating a different relationship. And I think immersive technologies like virtual reality is incredibly powerful in putting you inside of an environment, inside of an organism, and letting the environment impact how you move and how you feel. So suddenly it's like you're no longer in control of that environment. It is taking over you, and you kind of become part of it and form some like strange relationship. So I think this is the power of these immersive tools, is that you can see things you normally can't see. You can hear things you normally can't hear. Some artists also even work with smell. Another artist, Cecil, told us that it's an artist in Berlin that's working a lot with smell. That's really interesting. That's also like an immersive kind of practice. So for me, I think this is the potential of it. It can really create deep emotional resonance, and your body can enter a scale that normally doesn't really exist for our senses, but that through science we can talk about. And then, of course, there's the dystopian side of technology, which is kind of why I left the technology industry. So I used to produce and kind of create works for others. And I left that because it's so industrial now. The way most of those experiences are made is that someone writes a story and a concept, and then it's outsourced, and then it's manifested. So that becomes, through technology, a manifestation of something from your mind through culture. While I try to kind of encounter something I don't know about in an environment, and by talking with people and just by creating without knowing the final form. So I felt kind of like there's a space for experimentation in the art world, or with acute art, or in a context like this. And I think that's the passion. So.
And this is already 2 years ago. So when we actually collaborated, it was before I was working at Acute Art fully, but I was a little bit involved as some sort of curator advisor. And the piece, Aquaphobia, was on a VR app that we tested for a little while, and it worked quite well, actually. And I remember a journalist from the Süddeutsche Zeitung in Munich wanted to know what all these works were, and said, "What is this?" And it's actually a pretty good question, because, I didn't really know what to say, because I wasn't prepared to fully go into your imagery and describe what it is. But just listening to you now, talking about this microorganism that is actually, becoming huge and taking over, it is interesting that you look at these things, these textures, these colors, these atmospheres, these poetic landscapes, but you don't really know what you're looking at. And maybe you could just describe aquaphobia from that very basic point of view, because looking at it again, I remember that question that, well, I don't know, it's a poetic language produced by Jakob Kudstensen, but it has, figurative elements. Of course, you can see that you're in a world that you can recognize, but there are also elements that, you don't know what they are. I mean, this is a very stupid question, but what are we looking at?
Yeah, maybe actually, could we show a slide for a second? I don't know if we can put it up on the screen. I'm sorry to take your face away from the projector.
No, I'm happy about that.
Maybe we can do that 1 second and go to page 3 or 4 or something. So if you go down, you just go like to page 4. One more, cuatro. Here, okay. So there are kind of 2 dimensions to my work. One is the research, the collaboration, the science, and the collaborations that I kind of have behind a piece. And then that's what people experience. So it's sort of like I research a landscape. So here it's literally this park in Brooklyn that was flooded during the hurricane in Brooklyn, and it was underwater. And then I go to this place. So like to the left, you see this kind of my photography of going through the landscape. And to the upper left, it's like a satellite image of the actual place. And to the right, you have my virtual recreations of the actual place and the architecture from like a satellite view and from a first person view. So literally you are in an actual replication of this park in kind of a 1-to-1 scale. But then these strange things are happening. And the strange things that are happening are based on conversations I had with people that go to the park, and I asked them what is their imagination of the future of that landscape, because it's decided as like a public art commission. And they told me that, they were afraid of the rising water. And then I thought, okay, that's interesting. What is like fear of water, fear of the future? I started like seeing these 2 together. And then I talked to different psychologists that actually treat people for fear of water. And there are 5 different steps you go through. And then I kind of recreated these 5 steps in the virtual experience. And I also looked at, if we go one map, here. So up to the left, I also looked at like, historic maps of the place, people's photographs of it's being flooded. And I started looking at like deep sea imagery and the colors they have. If you look at the upper right, so that became the color scheme of the work. So it's sort of, for my research, I can very rationally tell you what they are. There is a kind of natural history element, looking at landscapes in the past. There are interviews, that's kind of the science, and that's me being in the landscape. But what I try to do with the immersive technology is to fuse these elements together, which we can talk about rationally individually, but once they all unite, it becomes something different outside of individual disciplines or a way of speaking. So I kind of just put them together really, and that becomes the artwork. So it's very intentional that the artwork is hard to define in a single sentence, because then it would make it very anthropocentric once again. If I was able to just exactly tell you what it is, I would manifest from my idea and language into an artwork. But by just putting these multiple disciplines together, it becomes something outside of myself. And I rarely know what it is while making it. It's just naturally evolves. Like literally for this artwork, I create the park first, and then I look into the natural history, and I'm like, there used to be this red clay. I better make a virtual hole in the park. And then I make a hole in the ground virtually, and I build an underground system. And through that, I create the story of the microbe, but it came later. I didn't know about it when I made the environment. So I think that's why, Daniel, it's maybe hard just to say one thing what it is, because it's intentional, not one thing. It's the combination of many things.
Because I couldn't describe it, but maybe this is, what you also intended. One can't really. I mean, of course, one recognizes things, and it's full of beautiful moments. So you almost want to indulge in that kind of spherical creature that hovers there, and you can describe it. But if you go deeper, you don't really know what it is. It's a kind of poetic moment rather than a kind of a naturalistic, realistic rendering of something perhaps. But I was thinking of, another statement of yours that you want to put poetry back into technology, or rather introduce poetry into technology. And I have to say that, I'm not at all a tech native. I'm, clearly a more traditional art world person who has been working for museums and even the Venice Biennale and an art school in Germany. And I've always been interested in new possibilities emerging. When I joined Acute Art, which is really just a kind of a place trying to explore these new possibilities with many, many artists, I created a little advisory board. And we only met for a few conversations, but it was Chow Fei and Hans Ulrich Obrist and Laurie Anderson, the artist and musician. And one of the reactions to this whole VR world is somehow that the devices are so unappealing and ugly, and the whole technology is so ugly. And Laurie would always say with her beautiful voice that doesn't matter. Once you're in it, you forget about it. And I have to say that your art is an example of that. No one cares about the devices anymore. If you're in Aquaphobia, you don't care what the headset looks like. And I mean, what does it mean for you to introduce poetry in technology? Is it still as urgent an issue, or are we now so used to these new technologies that we don't care, that we look at the art and not at the tech?
Yeah, I think we need a lot more poetry in technology. That is like a big focus of mine. So Aquaphobia, it's like I wrote a poem, but then work with another artist, Rendon Johnson, also is a fantastic VR artist, I think, but also a poet. And Rendon then narrated it. So it started this process of collaborating to the point where the recent project Bell in Berlin, it's just become this like morphing organism where it's like this big immersive installation, but there's also, we made an opera inside of the work. There's a singer Aka that sings to the work. I filmed the skies of the work, and this other artist, Precious, wrote a poem back responding to it. And another artist, Johanna Helden, wrote poetry in response to that world. So the worlds are kind of becoming call and response landscapes as well, where I invite other artists to respond to the environments, and they just send back whatever they want to send back in response to it. So it's almost becoming like a platform for poetry writing as well, which I find extremely exciting, because it seems like such an antithesis to virtual production, to just like, I spent a year making a work, but then someone spends an afternoon writing a poem to it. It takes them like a day, and it takes me a year. So you get this like intuitive, immediate response and sensibility that I feel is a nice contrast to this ugly technology, like you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A theme that actually connects many of your works. I'm fully aware that we will not be able to go deep into all of your recent productions, but I saw a beautiful piece called Liminal Lands in Arles, in France. And I know you had a big show in Berlin. It's called Barrel. And I have only read about that one. And then we have Aquaphobia, and we have a relatively recent AR exhibition here in London called The Deep Listener, which is more than an exhibition, an app. The themes of ecological challenge and biodiversity is linked to specific places. It can be a place in France or a place in Germany. Actually, a theme that combines some of your most ambitious projects is the wetland. And I know that the wetland is special because it's only a few % of Earth, but it has enormous amounts of species. So biodiversity, from a biodiversity point of view, these are very important spots. But I mean, maybe you can say a few things about wetlands and water and those specific ecologies, because it seems to be something that recurs in some of your most important works.
Yeah, definitely. Perhaps we can go to slide 12. If we can just skip quickly the next few. Just so that's Bell, and just next. Also, and next. And next, I'll just show a few slides. That's from Venice, from the Biennale. And next, that's the Deep Listener. It's like an AR project on top of a park. And just next, and one more. And one more. I just find some interesting, yeah, okay. So, yeah, wetlands, why wetlands? Aquaphobia takes place in a wetland. And my most two recent work, liminal lands in France. Can we do next slide? And one more. Yeah, so this is like a physical wetland, and the slide before is the virtual one. So I've been moving through wetlands for the past 2 years, working with field biologists, singers, and writers, and digitizing them and making these immersive environments. And the reason I've been focusing on wetlands is that I started looking into it, and it became like the most overlooked type of landscape in public discourse, because when you look at it, any major civilization, so any large city in the whole world that has more than like 60 years of history is based on a wetland. Only nomadic cultures have not settled by a wetland. So this is universal to all human culture, because a wetland is an ecosystem that is able to continuously generate fresh water. And all large groups of humans needs immediate access to fresh water. But in the 1800s, across Europe, the wetland became seen as like an antithesis to the modern landscape, because the wetland is like, you can't really grow food there, you can't really move through it, it's like really complicated to physically move through. I mean, it's like often made of mud, and it's not like beautiful. So it had very little rationality within like a more modern perception of what either an urban landscape is or kind of utilitarian landscape. So most of the wetlands in the world became paved over. And now it's to the point where a lot of the cities are starting to repave over the wetlands, because all the cities are in this massive conflict now where they don't have access to fresh water. And a wetland is also like a liver in a landscape. It can filter toxins in the soil, and it can serve as a buffer. So if the water rises, a wetland will absorb it. And because we don't have wetlands, we have all these floodings now, like in Brooklyn, in Venice, in Copenhagen, in London, I mean, all over, in Berlin. It's because we've removed the wetlands. So now a lot of cities in the world are actually starting to revert backwards. So like in this city, Aarhus in Denmark, they had a big road through the city. They removed the road and created a wetland. And around Berlin, they start to do the same, because it's sort of necessary for our survival. There's no wetland, there's no human, because there's no fresh water. And it's just very recent that we've kind of forgotten this. It's only like 200 years ago. So I've been kind of looking at revitalizing a sense of fascination, poetry towards the wetland. So the big change in these projects is very much based on, like poetry and aquaphobia. But in Balbal, the project in Berlin, it was based on revitalizing like past songs, stories, and mythologies from European wetland cultures, and then create an artwork from those sensibilities. So as an artist, I think more and more I can bring back fascination and a different sensibility towards the landscape, which is kind of an abstract thing.
Beautiful, thank you. This makes a lot of sense to listen to you and hear. I understand it's a very different art world that you're exploring. Centering around specific ecological conditions. And maybe a question that has more to do with the medium of or it's not one medium, it's a cluster of mediums, I guess. And if we look back on the history of modern art, we can see a few moments, we can define moments when a new medium kind of appears, and often it crystallizes in a number of important artworks. And we had photography that produced a lot of confusion and exaggerations, and people wondered what photography would do to art. Will it kill painting? All of these old conversations. And through the 20th century, we had the cinema, and then at some point we had the video camera and video, and of course television, major. And then came the internet, and in our century, I guess we have a handful of new mediums that are all linked. From a technical point of view, they're maybe almost the same. It's more like a curatorial decision, how you use them. If you're placing things in the world as a mixed reality, or if you're closing off the imagery and you produce VR. And yes, this cluster of new mediums, it does represent a paradigm shift again. And I'm wondering what your assessment is. I mean, I had a conversation with Douglas Copeland, who is the famous writer, novelist, but also an artist and a designer. And I asked him, is this comparable to the introduction of television, or is it bigger? Is it even like electricity? And he said, definitely electricity. It will change everything. I mean, and that's a very bombastic statement, perhaps, but I'm wondering what would you say? Are these new mediums going to change our way of inhabiting the planet radically, or is it more of an artistic possibility? I mean, how big a revolution is this, the introduction of virtual possibilities and immersive mediums?
If we take one more slide, I'll kind of try to speak from that. If we go next. Yeah, okay. So I think the most exciting part about these virtual technologies is not necessarily if it's in VR, if it's an installation or AR, like the way you experience it, but it's the way it's made. So to create it, you need to work with you need to actually really work with an architect or someone in choreography if you make virtual reality, because you need to know how the body moves in space. You need to work kind of with a composer or a sound artist to make sound feel like a lot, and if you start having like actors within it, like people moving around, then you need to work with choreographer or acting. If you want like color schemes like this, you either need to train like in painting. So I trained really traditional, like actually 1800 style oil painting. So this is a base of how I use color. Or you really work with someone in cinema. So by the nature of, and you would need to work with people with technology, of course, in programming. So by the nature of how it's made, you need to fuse together different fields that have been separated. Otherwise, you can't really create it at a level where it's just like really hits you in the gut. You really need to respect the human body in a virtual space. Movement, color, sound. So what's exciting, I think, and the huge change is how it's made. And by the nature of how it's made, you will need to collaborate across different fields for it to excel. You can't create it in a silo, or you can, but you might be missing some of the potential. So I think that's a huge change of it. So these technologies are changing how a lot of industries operate, from film, theater, art world, conferences like this, like in hybrid formats. I think that's the big shift. But it's interesting also, I think, that you mentioned photography, because this work we're looking at is made first with photography. So I go out and I take like 1,000 photographies of every single object, and I do like that over a year, and then I put it together virtually. So it's a process called photogrammetry. So this is actually a new form of, it's the next extension of photography, not as a two-dimensional surface, but as three-dimensional photography. And then that kind of becomes reanimated with code, with sound, and physical movement. So all these other disciplines are fusing into and with each other in new ways. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
That seems to be an important part of the possibility, and actually of what you seem to embrace entirely. I mean, we have a version of modern art that emphasizes purity and discipline, specificity, and pure painting and pure music and this and that. And this moment seems to be a moment when all the mediums can actually be somehow replicated and revisited and kind of absorbed into a new mega medium, or I don't know what to call this. And when listening to you, when you say, and then we had poetry, and you wrote poetry, and other people contributed poetically, and then we wrote an opera, or there was an opera. It's like all the disciplines show up, and you are fully embracing that, no?
Yeah, and I think it's also for me exciting way of collaborating. So it's not just like about me being an artist. It's like I work with, like when we did the opera in Berlin, there's this other artist, Pan, that works with an opera singer from LA. So they are themselves as artists creating together with the work. fields that has more experience with this might be film and theater than the art world, for example, where usually before it's like one artist with a name in a studio, people create beneath them. But it's very hard to find the most exciting innovation and talent if their names remain hidden. It's more exciting for someone to say, do you want to be a singer in my artwork and work within that domain of it? The more interesting young artists today might be more inclined to say yes to that versus do you want to be on a payroll creating for it, sort of. So I think this is really exciting because you can get new people that might not otherwise meet each other, collaborate, but they remain individuals together. So it's like relative working together, but also relative kind of individualism. So it's a bit of hybrid of both, I think.
No, very interesting that these projects somehow take us back to some historical moments that I've always been very interested in, when all the genres, all the disciplines actually come together, clash or collaborate. I mean, in surrealism or Dada, but actually maybe more radically in the 1960s with there were movements like art and EAT, experiments in art and technology, but also generally. And there were these moments with the Merce Cunningham and Robert Rauschenberg and all these people actually going far beyond their normal zones. And I think we're in such a moment right now. And your collaborations are a fantastic example of that, actually. There's so many themes. I know we don't have infinite amounts of time, but there are like 2 or 3 things I want to ask you about. One is, of course, where this kind of art, I mean, it's strange to say this kind of art just because you're using a specific technology, but where it will sit institutionally and maybe also in the art world at large, including the art market. And somehow it's been the case that we have thought about digital things as being, nowhere and everywhere, and infinitely reproducible, or reproduction is not even the right word anymore. It's just omnipresent, and therefore very interesting, but without value. And in this, economical value. But in recent months or in the recent year, this whole world of blockchain technology has become more visible. Many people have known about this for years, but now it's become, some sort of strange craze, even that people start buying these things, and often things that I don't even understand the attraction, but they are unique objects in the digital world. And do you think this kind of monetization, this commercialization of the digital world, is that helpful, or does it take away the charm? I mean, I always thought that, we're personally, I've seen this as a curatorial possibility, that one can explore entirely new worlds with significant artists. And there's always this moment of, this window of experimentation that lasts for a few years until things become normalized and commercialized. And you've been right at the center of this window of experimentation, I have to say. What do you make out of this whole NFT craze?
Good question. I'm exploring that. I haven't worked with it yet, but I think the exciting thing lies in it just as a different form of support system. I think that is the essence of it. So, I have colleagues that might before only be able to make their work by working on films or music video, for example, where suddenly they can unfold themselves as artists. So I think the most exciting thing right now are artists who might not be in the art world otherwise, who already have markets, but people who will suddenly be able to express themselves in ways that before had no kind of a platform. I think that's like where it gets really exciting. And for me, that means, for example, maybe I can explore making projects more like distributed. So right now I have to make large projects that are big enough that they can show in museums, they can show in festivals, they can be online. They need to touch a lot of people for it to sort of have, let's say, monetary incentive for foundations and museums. It needs to really reach. But it also means that I can only create large creations where I miss being the painter in me, just like going out, looking at a few different plants, elements, and making something small. and more like immediate, more intuitive, like the poets I work with. So I kind of miss that. And I think something like NFTs and more like distributed creation can support that, because suddenly maybe I can go to a landscape, talk to some field biologists, scan like some beautiful formations, and then just make that immediately accessible without the necessity of like a big, more like institutional framework. So for me, I think that's where it gets exciting. It's that you can distribute more, you can collaborate in different ways. So that's kind of how I look at it. I look at it as, okay, so what new supply system can it enable? And that's, but I mean, I haven't worked with it yet, but these are kind of my takes on it.
No, I mean, that sounds like a very sound really approach to the whole thing. And it has, of course, confused people and probably also disturbed and annoyed people, because it is a disruptive possibility there, where we can see that traditional structures in the art world are maybe no longer quite relevant for this, you know, from museums to art fairs to galleries, but somehow the commercial world always wins. Well, rather, one always finds way to and this is a new possibility. I mean, maybe a last comment or question about where we are in the you know, here we are talking you know, from different places and looking at something online that is also present in Venice, and the whole hybrid art world. I wonder a little bit about it. I mean, now we have Freeze opening here tomorrow, and I did a little journal which is called Catalog, and it's about these possibilities. It's interviews with Carrie Twin Evans and with some of the artists that you mentioned, Precious, and other people working with AR and new immersive possibilities. That we have placed a few AR components on the street. It's very humble. It's a very modest little show. But actually, the magazine is an example of a hybrid exhibition. We will ship it. I'll send one to you. And if you point the camera to it, there are 4 different AR components. It's a, you know, a miniature show if you want, but it's triggered by physical object, but it's can be triggered anywhere from the Himalayas to Mexico City to Iceland, or, you know, or Venice. And I think that the art world really, I mean, the things we've been talking about, the introduction of a new medium or a cluster of new mediums, a new market tool, the NFT, the pandemic locking us all into our own apartments for months, even years. I mean, you don't have to be Michel Foucault to understand that, you know, our frameworks are changing and that there will be new possibilities. I mean, I've been very much part of an old art world where you fly to another continent for a weekend to look at art and then you fly home, or you go to a conference and you talk about global warming and then you fly home. It's absurd. This will go away, I guess. And I guess this conversation is an example of something that is, yeah, as I said at the very beginning, wouldn't have happened 2 or 3 years ago. What are your expectations, or maybe rather aspirations, or even hopes for this new art world? And I mean, what would be the ideal scenario for you? You already found a way to work, I feel, because you do find in you know, academic or institutional support. So in a way, you're not alone, but you're one of very few who actually seems to be, yeah, you seem successful in finding ways to actually introduce these artworks and so that they can reach big audiences. I mean, what are the biggest challenges and what are the biggest hopes?
Yeah, so that's something I also worked a lot with Serpentine Galleries in London. I have a lot of conversations with them. They have this kind of laboratory for new institutional frameworks, especially with digital art. So but for my practice, it's sort of like I have to be an artist, my own gallery, and my own producer. So now we have a studio and everything, but I had to like really invent my own, push and invent my own existence into where the works can fit. You know, yeah. It's kind of like this like new media hustling that is part of me, because I worked in that in New York in the past, which is like a kind of more like you present stuff, you need to fund stuff and so on. But that's really hard. I think that's very hard for most artists to do, to build their own infrastructure and system and mix different fields to be able to create on your own. So for me, I think the one thing that would be extremely exciting would be, you know, art institutions publishing, So your biggest challenge when you have to navigate online space is that you're quote unquote competing with, you know, something like Netflix, Hollywood games. So you're in this advertising space where you might publish the most amazing artwork online, but no one will see it because they do not know it exists, because it's a space where millions of dollars are spent, you know, on their advertising. So in the future, I hope that there's like a constellation or institution to something that emerges and makes a serious art publishing platform, because they would have the influence and power to continuously create brand and awareness beyond, you know, the individual artists, but individual artists can participate and then become part of that. So I think that would make a huge difference, actually. It's like a virtual institution in a way. Yeah, I think that would be a huge help in the future for artists.
You know, we need another seminar or conversation or conference very soon, because there's a big theme that people talk about, and that has, you know, that also produces a lot of confusion. And it's, you know, the metaverse, or some people talk about the multiverse, and that, you know, you can produce these things and it will be platform agnostic in the sense that things can move in and out of games, and it could be in Minecraft or in Fortnite, and it could be on an app, and it could be, you know, that there will be a new platforms that are very, very large. I have to say that I think, Jacob, that you have been an inspiration to many people, because you have created your own art world, and it's quite tour de force. It's quite something that you pulled off. That, you know, you have collaborations, you have supporters, you have people interested like myself following and wondering where it's going, but you have somehow created your own platforms, and I think that's you know, something to admire. Look, Jacob, I think we should open up. You and I could speak forever, I think, and I have so many other things that I would want to ask you about, but we should open the floor, because we've been talking for 45 minutes already. But I will, you know, I think most questions will be for you, but I'll be here if there are questions for me too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much to the both of you. So if there are comments or questions, please, I ask you to come on stage so that we can hear you and people can see you. Sorry for that, but thank you so much for the rich conversation, Daniel and Jakob. Yes, please. And also, if we have questions from the Zoom chat, yes, you tell me.
Hi, Jakob, thanks for your fascinating work. I'm really looking forward to doing the 360-degree video experience. My question is about the agency that the spectator or the participant has or doesn't have. Because from what I gathered from the 2D version, and it's kind of from some other VR experiences I've had, there's that kind of paradox where you feel like you've got a bit of agency because you can look around, but ultimately what we see in that poem, it's all about, as you were saying, our lack of agency, like in relation to this being, to water. And I know that, you know, in the video game world, there's been some really interesting work on narrative and agency and that sort of thing. So I'm just wondering, like, how that figures in your thinking, like how much agency you want to give people who are experiencing your art. And then I suppose something that relates to that, and thinking about the themes of the conference, about the kind of ecological questions, is, do you think when you're making the work, do you think about how that then transfers to the world outside your work? Like how you want, do you think that, that the fascination that you spoke about, do you want to see that transferred? Are you thinking about how your spectators are going to be moving and interacting with the world beyond your work as well?
Two things, yeah. So, I mean, I hope that the work impacts people, but primarily for me, it's almost like making a psychological space. There's a landscape, there's a technology, and that's your brain. I try to like always fuse them together. So to create a kind of mystery or curiosity towards the landscape or the theme. And I hope that remains with people, because it's emotionally resonating. But then that's kind of how I look at that. In Berlin, we did work we're close with the director of the Natural History Museum there on the project. So they actually did a whole educational program next to the artwork. So you can go to this immersive exhibition, From the exhibition, you can book a tour in a canoe through the wetlands with the biologist, or you can go to the Natural History Museum where you get to learn about the exhibition, and then you go from the museum to the exhibition. But it's just this way of thinking I have of like expertise working together next to each other without blending them together and losing what each person has spent a long time learning about and what the history of the institution is. So that means I make the artwork, they make the kind of educational part. But we do it together, but we don't kind of fuse them together to something that's maybe not the best education and maybe not actually that impactful as an artwork. So that's kind of how I think about that. But with interaction, for me, it just depends on the theme of the artwork. So in Aquaphobia, it's like a poem and you follow you move around in the landscape and you go through these 5 steps and you're guided by the poem, similar to how you would with a psychologist. So that fits like a relative form of interaction. But with the piece I did with Luma and Al, it's made actually for 4 people together that do a kind of a ritual experience for 18 minutes where they become part of the landscape. So when you physically move, sounds in the environment change, and sounds changes all of what you see. So the more you move, the more the work reacts. The less you move, the more it's just a virtual thing around you. So here it's kind of like a play with rhythm and engagement. So people have very different experiences, but that one is like you do like this, things open up and sounds change. You do like this, they change again. But I focus a lot on intuitive interaction. So where like when I worked on more like virtual production, the interaction paradigm is like you click, you do something, you get a response. This is also how we navigate emails and virtual media, everything. You click, it's like you see, you click, you hear, that's response. But this is a rational, it's like, we're very used to this. So I think that's not so interesting to explore as an artist. I'm interested in like intuitive interaction where you actually create a whole interactive technology, but people never think about it, but it's there. So this is how I think about it. It's like being outside or something. It's like you actually interact with the wind, but your body just kind of knows it. So that's the form of interaction I focus on. But I have other works, one called Primal Tourism, that's this large virtual island. It's much more interactive. You teleport around, you can choose where to go. It's more like conventional that way. I think it always fits what you're trying to achieve mentally. Because if you add suddenly like clunky hand controllers, but you want to make people completely forget themselves, they're continuously reminded each time they click that they're in a human body in a device. So it's just different designs, I think. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes, please come here. So that, good. Then we have a question from the chat as well. So thank you for coming here on stage. So.
Hi, Jakob. Thank you for the talk. The question really is about locations. So you mentioned the photogrammetry technique, which relies on apprehending an object in 3 dimensions and specific to that location. And that's something specific to photography as a medium. But then the question is like, how do you identify these locations? Where does it, and also in relation to, the topic of the conversation is ecology. What does it mean for you to go to Brooklyn and to connect with that reality? Do you work in Denmark? Do you prefer to work locally? Or do you see it as a part of a global international art world?
Yeah, so when I made the project in Brooklyn, I lived in New York. So I was working with the landscape doing a public commission in New York. When I made the project in France, I lived in France for a year with the Luma Foundation. When I made the project in Berlin, I lived there for a year. Of course, I can't keep moving every year. So this is like something Daniel also mentioned of like the global art world and things. I think about this a lot. I think it could be exciting to do a project where I do this call and response and I work with artists in different places. They scan locally and the world is built together. And maybe this is actually where NFTs and things can actually help this whole new distributed way of thinking and creating. And then how I select the landscape, it's really just, I look at it first always from satellite, and then I talk to a lot of experts that know things I don't know about. So I never enter it really knowing what I'll do. And they tell me about perspectives. With wetlands, it's been a lot of soil and water. So then I focus on that. And then I go to the landscape, first with a scientist, and after a while, they open up. They start telling me like personal perspectives. And then I start looking at what more emotionally they know about a place. Because they might have spent, 30 years in a place, which goes beyond science. If you spend 30 years in a swamp, it's not just science and work. It's like passion, imagination, like you love this place. So I try to look for these perspectives. And once I know them, I then just start drifting around. And I do this photogrammetry with a focus in mind, but without really knowing what is beyond that. And I think that's where it kind of becomes an artwork, it becomes an intuitive engagement with a place. And I scan them with kind of a suit on so I can really lay in the mud and move around objects. Like you spend one day around one rock. And so you move around a rock in like a clock movement for like 4 hours, and then you have a scan. So it's very physical to create, but it's also very intuitive by intention. So it's a bit of chaos as well. Like yeah.
Thank you. One more question. When you were talking about the emotional response to a place, I remember seeing your work actually installed in London in Serpentine Gallery, I think, and having a stronger emotional response to that as well. And of course, that is something that we often come to art for that emotional response to Anthropocene, which has got this enormous scale that is very hard to comprehend mentally. But we are supposed to think about art as something that gives us a way into an emotional response to that. Is that part of your thinking, that you want people to experience certain emotions, and that is your way of engaging with that problematic?
Yeah, I think that's becoming my primary aim. And I've learned that that's what I can do, is to make genuine emotional response and just do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, this last question, I think it's very important for the discussion we will have tomorrow during the workshop, which will focus on the psychological aspects of Jakob's work. So shall we read, the Zoom question? Yeah, I can see that, so maybe you can read that, Petra? Or, they want to, okay, then please. Yeah, perfect, we see you, cool. Nice.
Hi, I'm Leah from Seminar 4, and thank you very much for this impressive presentation and your exchange. I have a question that might sound provocative, but I don't mean to call you out or anything, because I think we're all concerned with these questions in one way or another. I was just wondering, can you estimate the environmental impact of your practice that is heavily reliant on technology, and it's a long-term project, and in order to make it happen, you are involved with so many energy-consuming practices, and then how this in general applies to what we know about immersion in VR technology, and how this relates to maybe the notion of invasiveness. And then again, a general question that would be of interest for me as your practice in VR. I'm just interested how this promise of smoothness that VR seems to be able to bring across, how this actually relates to some of the more general questions that that we're tackling in terms of environmental questions. Because I'm coming from a queer feminist perspective, I'm a bit suspicious of these promises of smoothness, but I think it's also quite interesting to think through the means of new technology. So I would be interested in what your practice in VR is about in terms of that. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are actually, Liz in our studio manager has a background in supply chain. So we have a full map of our use of energy and everything. It's not ideal, but in Berlin, that's like carbon offsetting, which is not like a ideal scenario. But we are actually mapping it and looking at it, and quite detailed and serious. And then of course, like when I create artworks, I try to make work with a very slow approach. So even though like presentations are kind of big technologies, the creation is just a few people over a long period of time creating with like a camera on a laptop, for example. So it's like I'm in a landscape over a long period, moving and digitizing. So that process is not a lot more than what we're doing right now. Like you're sitting on Zoom, I'm sitting on Zoom, we're spending this kind of energy. So the actual creation of artworks is quite low, but this is, again, I mean, I work with the whole concept of slow media and I try to slow things down. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's a super complicated thing that I think about a lot. But I am also kind of coming to a point of accepting that, like when these artworks they're very emotional. So it's sort of when I kind of see that or see people's response, or I receive like letters or something, or people are really they really like shake and move after, you know, like when I see this, it kind of makes sense to me. That's how, I mean, these are the things that we do for it. So yeah, I mean, we do like carbon offsetting, but I mean, you're still, you know, that's not a solution sort of. Yeah, but I'm also really accepting that I'm not like, I'm more a poet than an activist. And I'm completely explicit about this. I'm not like changing the world of wetlands. That is not my aim. And that is not the role I'm in. I'm like a little artist with a few collaborators. And I try to share it with many people. So also, if you look at shows in Carbon, it's like an artwork virtually might be experienced by like up to of our works, like 100,000 people. And it's very minimal to exhibit. It's very minimal to share. You can experience it anywhere. So there's actually low carbon in relationship to making physical things or even doing Zoom panels. With streaming technologies, it's extremely costly on the environment. So like we mostly do like physical installations or setups. So there's not a lot of like networking streaming technology going on over the internet, but mainly locally in a building. Yeah. I hope that, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
I think we have another question from seminar 4. Yeah.
Yes, hello. So going back to choreography, I think the most interesting VR work that I've seen is the videos of people with the VR headsets on, like kind of going like this. You know, I know that's not supposed to be the most interesting VR work, but I kind of think it is. It sounds like you've started to explore that a little bit in your work for 4 people, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little more about sort of the choreography or the movement of the gesture of the viewer and how that, the potential of that in an artistic, perhaps political, embodied practice and context, and how we could take that further.
Yeah, so how you take it further, I think I can, maybe Daniel can also answer to that with a cute, but for me, it's sort of, I create a choreography for a body in space. So when I literally create an artwork, I think, how big an area can this occupy? Is it 2 × 2 meters? Is it 10 × 10? What is the physical arena? And then I position your body in that place. And then something might happen in color, in light, in sound, or objects or things that makes you want to sort of look to your left, look to your right, look down, look up. And especially this work, Limitless in France, is a work where I'm really trying to explore this more, so that you're kind of creating a choreography for a body through a virtual architecture that can become anything over time. So it's a bit like things can, expand or kind of contract. Things that can react to you or not, or push you away or kind of attract you. So you're creating like a spatial choreography for a person, and that makes them move around. So when they do like that, it's probably because someone decided that a little organism is flying by, or like, there's an organism here, people don't see it, but then you just circulate it around someone. So then if they don't see it right away because they're looking the other way, it comes here, and then they start doing like that, and then you kind of have the audience as performers in space. That's how I do it. There is a great artist, June, I forgot her name, June Macmillan, I think it is, in New York, that is I think it's really exciting artist. She's digitizing Black performers' dances through time. So she's finding archival footage of different body movements than like I have, that I make for in a museum, for example. And then she's creating a library of those through motion capture. So this is a way that there's a whole group of people working more with like overlooked forms of movement and storing them. Because digital technology can also be a storage. So they are storing that, yeah.
Thank you. I think we can pick the last question in the chat, maybe. Oh no, here it is. Good, then another one. But we can't hear you. Try to, yeah.
Okay,
no.
can we have one more question from some next one? I was interested in what you were saying about the 5 steps in the treatment for aquaphobia, and that you use that in your video. And well, I guess my first question, understanding is, are you trying to cure people with your video experience following those 5 steps? And then as a response to what Leah asked, so that you wouldn't call yourself an activist, is that related to those 5 steps? So is it that you're accepting the state, the environmental state, and therefore offering the solution? Or where would you position yourself with the goal of the art?
Yeah, I actually presented Aquaphobia once in a conference in San Francisco about using VR for treating post-traumatic stress. And just like here, I find it really interesting when suddenly as an artist, you're showing your artwork in a more like academic setting, or about like actual treatment of a phobia, like the fear of water. If it can cure people for fear of water, I don't know. I've definitely experienced with fear of heights many times in VR, that I have works where you start flying slowly, and people who have fear of heights have done it. And at first they sit there, you can see like they kind of freeze for a second and then let go. And they explained to me after how they are afraid of heights, but it kind of changed them a bit. So I mean, in the broader context, I think that VR has actually been used for decades for treating a lot of phobia and things. If my artwork does that, I don't know. I think I try to just sort of introduce a sensibility or a theme and let people respond to that on their own and just see what happens. And that's kind of I mean, I'm kind of accepting my role as an artist in a way, and my limitation, and just be kind of direct about it, I think.
Yes, maybe we can link the last question in the chat to your answer now. The first part of it, Davide is asking if you are afraid of water. And yes or no, or since you were speaking of, yes, the reaction that people have.
So I'm not afraid of water. I grew up by the ocean. I'm like avid, I go scuba diving a lot and use that as inspiration for making virtual spaces. So I feel like completely at ease with water. But sometimes, you know, it's also interesting for me, like making artworks about things that were outside of my awareness, and, you know, interviewing, talking to psychologists and get this like strange ping pong back and forth. I'm not afraid of water myself, but yeah.
Good. So are there any other urgent questions in the floor? Otherwise, I would say that since it's 1 p.m., we can conclude our conversation here, and maybe keep thoughts and questions and comments for tomorrow's meeting. Yes, Valeria?
Very, very quickly, but I just wanted to add two things which probably, are going to link to tomorrow. So thanks, Jakob and Daniel for the wonderful conversation. But one thing that arose from the conversation is that, for example, VR experiences, you can have motion sickness. So of course, the performance and how your body reacts to it is incredibly important. And then another thing is that, there's been some neuroscience studies highlighting that basically, whenever you're experiencing VR, the same areas of your brain are being activated as if you would be dreaming. Tomorrow, another thing, we'll be in conversation with a shaman, Joe Bowlby. And when she saw, it's just a little bit thing, but when she saw the Aquaphobia piece, she said, it really reminds me of an ayahuasca trip. So, if we have, to consider, about how we can treat fears, with VR experience, how we can extend reality through that. And just to link, again, for the talk we're going to have tomorrow with Monica Bello, who is the director at the art at CERN, we're going to be talking about the quantum field. So, answering to Daniel, I think I prefer the use multiverse because in a way it's expanding reality and giving access to multiple universe. And another thing, to link again, it's the quantum field. Everything is energy. And we're always, considering that technologies is something completely independent. But if we want to start thinking about synthetic biologies, this sort of experiences are new ecosystems. They look back at nature, and nature, has a response to them. And this is, has been happening, through the beginning of times. So I just want to conclude with this, and we can keep the conversation open tomorrow. So thank you everyone again for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was fun.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the hybrid format went quite well. So thank you for being here. And I would say that now, yes, we can maybe have also a more informal talk, maybe outside in the campo if somebody wants to. And our next, let's say, meeting is this afternoon for the keynote. Yeah. So see you then. And thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.